My name is Shilpi Sharma, currently pursuing Masters at IIT Guwahati. This podcast discussion is separate from my research here at IIT Guwahati. I'm trying to provide you information at zero cost. Here I invite people from different domains to share their expertise and knowledge. Be smart what you are consuming because you are responsible for your well-being, not me. So let's start today's podcast. I hope it will be beneficial for you all, including me. Good evening, everyone. Today we are welcoming Mr. Anil Swarup, a distinguished former IAS officer who has dedicated 38 years to serving our country and has significantly contributed to the realm of good governance. He is not only a retired Indian Administrative Service officer of the 1918 batch from the Uttar Pradesh cadre, but also an accomplished author. His extensive career includes numerous pivotal roles in both the union government and the government of Uttar Pradesh. Before his tenure in the IS, he briefly served as an Indian Police Services and his career is marked by numerous achievements. He was awarded the Director's Gold Medal for being the best officer trainee of his batch at the Labasna. His role have included Education Secretary of India, Co-Secretary of India, Additional Secretary in the Cabinet Secretariat, and so on and so forth. And he has also served as a district magistrate of Lakhimpur during the Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi agitation under the Chief Minister, Mr. Kalyan Singh. He has shared his rich experience through his writing. And today we will have a discussion on one of his books, Encounters with Politicians. Welcome to the DWHR Discussion with Human Resource podcast, sir. Thank you for taking the time out for this conversation.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, sir. So let's start. I would like to ask first, what inspired you to join civil services? And after a brief stint in the Indian Police Services, what led you to join the Indian Administrative Services?
Right from the beginning, right from the time that I started reading or writing, I saw a paper written by my dad who wanted me to become an IAS officer. So I made his dream into my dream, and it was because of his dream that I finally became an IAS officer. And I switched to IAS because I wanted to be an IAS officer and not just an IPS officer. So my original aim was to get in the IAS. I did not get the right rank in the beginning, so I could not qualify for the IAS. The second year, I got a better rank and got into the IAS.
Sir, just to make understand for the wider audience who are not in this UPSC journey, sir, what are the difference in Indian Police Services and Indian Administrative Services in terms of roles and responsibility? Was there any a bigger role associated with that Indian Administrative Services?
Yes, actually, police service is basically into maintenance of law and order, managing crime and things like that. They are not so much associated with development work of the country. So it's more of a prevention rather than looking at prevention and taking care of the crime, rather than looking at the developmental aspects. The IS canvas is much bigger than the police service. As district magistrate, you look into the law and order and crime issues also, but it is much beyond just law and order and crime. So that's what the IS is all about.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much for sharing this insightful answer because it will really help people outside of this domain to understand that the work responsibility associated with these both roles. And could you share some of your most memorable experience from your training at La Patna? Because there you received a prestigious award for being a gold medalist.
Actually, that period of 2 years was probably the finest of one's lifetime. You have no responsibility. You got a job that you wanted, that you dreamt of. You have a salary. At that point in time, you're not married also. So you actually have a great time. I had probably the best time at the academy where I made friends with people who I'm still friends with. This was more than 40 years ago. And you come into association with others who qualified not only for the IS. In the foundation course, you have officers from other services also. You touch base with a lot of people from all around the country, and I don't think there's any occasion, anywhere, anytime that you get to meet so many people who've done so well in their lives, qualified for a good service, and you get to interact with them. Apart from that, the environment at the academy is absolutely phenomenal. Excellent weather, nice people around, not, as I said, not much of responsibility. So it was much of a paid holiday that one enjoyed for those two.
Sir, what is the time duration for this? This training completion.
Overall training is for 2 years, for which
Okay.
the initial 3 months is the foundation course, which is
Mhm.
followed by what is called the phase one for 9 months. And then you go to the district. You serve in, not serve in the district, you get your district training for another 8, 9 months. You come back to the academy for 3, 4 months and you do what they call the phase two. So it's overall 2 years training course that you.
If I can understand by this context, when you have mentioned like getting exposure while placing into districts, that means that program has meant to get familiarized with that
Yes.
environment.
No, you are actually trained. You go attached to the tehsil. You get attached to the block. You learn how revenue matters are handled, how district collector's office functions. You do a lot of learning during that time. That's what we.
So, like many youngsters joining the Indian Administrative Services, you believed initially that all the country's wrongs were on account of politician, as you have mentioned in your book. So, over the time, how did you discover that even politicians too had their shades of goods, the bad and the ugly, and even the bad and the ugly ones had fair shades. So, could you
No,
elaborate
actually,
any example?
this is true of any human being also, but more so of politicians because I had this wrong prejudice against the politicians, and as I came to interact with many of them of many shades and color, both at the district level then at the state level. So I worked with wonderful people like Mr. Kalyan Singh, who was one of the finest persons apart from being a great politician. I worked with him. Then I had the occasion to work with politicians of other parties, political parties also. Like I had the occasion to work with Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge, Mr. Oscar Fernandez, Mr. Prakash Javadekar. So these were very fine persons, apart from being great leaders and good politicians. So one got to know that even in amongst the politicians, there they are very, very nice people. And as you mentioned, there were politicians who were not so great, who were not so positive, who were quite corrupt. Even in them, I found a variety of leadership qualities, the way they worked along with the team. So gradually over a period of time, you start understanding that no one is perfect on this earth. If that includes politicians as well. So my job primarily was to learn as much as possible from the positives of any person. Of course, there were politicians like Mr. Kalyansi who had many, many more positives than the negatives that he had. But there were other politicians, as I said, who may not have that many positives, but almost everyone had some positive quality, which I thought was worth imbibing.
Yeah, as you have mentioned about Mr. Kalyan Singh, so you work directly with three chief ministers, Mr. Kalyan Singh and Ms. Mayawati in Uttar Pradesh and Mr. Raghuvar Das in Jharkhand. So, could you elaborate on the differences in their approaches to work? And additionally, could you share the incident involving, that Mr. Kalyan Singh's son and the use of vehicle, as you have mentioned in your book? So,
See,
yeah.
Kalyan Singh was a politician apart. As I said, I had totally different impression about politicians, and gradually, as I observed Mr. Kalyan Singh, I could not believe that a politician could be as honest as he was, because my assumption was that all politicians are diehard, dishonest people. So that was my first impression about politicians, and then gradually, when I came to associate it with Kalyan Singh, and the incident that you mentioned is one of the many incidents which made me believe that he was absolutely above board. I distinctly remember in my capacity as Director Information and Public Relations, I used to accompany him to some of the events. So one of the mornings when I had gone to pick him up from his residence, I was to accompany him along with him to a place where the event was to take place. And by which time I had got this information from a batchmate of mine who was District Magistrate Aligarh that the son of the Chief Minister had taken away the vehicle of the Chief Development Officer. It was very unusual. So while traveling, I mentioned this to Mr. Kalyan Singh. Mr. Kalyan Singh immediately asked the vehicle to turn back. In those days, we didn't have mobile phones. So he said that I want to go back to the residence. And we came back to the residence. I was sitting in an outside room and I could hear that Mr. Kalyan Singh was shouting at somebody. And then he came out as a normal human being, and then he came along with me and we went to that event. Later in the evening, I got to know that the vehicle had been returned to the Chief Development Officer. So obviously he had spoken to somebody or maybe his son and told him that vehicle has to be returned. Now, this is a very, very small incident. But for a chief minister be particularly concerned about such a happening was truly remarkable. I never thought that anyone would do that. He did that.
It's very rare to know about this, and being a politician and not utilizing his authority in terms of the services and facilities has been given to him, or maybe his relative, as you have mentioned, his
No,
son.
actually, it was not a question of facility. I mean, the
Yeah.
probably that was the practice that the powerful politician, will take away anybody's car and use it. He wanted to set a signal. This was not the only incident. The way he used to encourage people express their opinion was quite phenomenal. He encouraged people to express their views and thoughts. One day, in fact, he told me, अनिल जी आप देखते होंगे कि मैं शुरू में नहीं बोलता अपनी अपनी राय नहीं इसलिए नहीं देता कि अगर मैं राय दे दूंगा फिर सब वही राय देंगे. So
Yeah.
he was very clear. He wanted opinion from everyone. Then he took a call. Since you are asking the distinction between these three, here was a politician who was not only honest, but very committed to the cause of the state. His commitment levels, his indulgence, the meticulous details that he went into before taking decisions, the manner in which he took people to task who was not doing their work was quite a lesson in leadership. And the guy who would take any responsibility. I remember when Babri Masjid actually came down, he was opposed to all that. He was opposed to the congregation of people there, and he was opposed to bringing down the masjid in the manner it was. He himself took the entire responsibility. I was the only person with him on the fateful day when he asked me to get a piece of paper, and in his hand he wrote, प्रकरण का उत्तरदायित्व मैं लेता हूं किसी अन्य को जिम्मेदारी. I'm told later on it was typed and sent to the governor as his resignation letter. But the fact of the matter is that he was prepared to take responsibility. As against this, when I worked with Madam Mayawati, I was not very sure about the way she was going about it. She did not go into the details of issues that Kalyan Singh did. I have not seen any corrupt practice per se, but I could conjecture the manner in which decisions were happening. They were not absolutely above board, and I used to feel very uneasy. So that was the difference. It was sheer contrast between Kalyan Singh and Mayawati. Mayawati came from a different ilk. She wanted to order things around. She was like a queen there. Kalyan Singh was much more grounded. Mayawati did not understand many things. She took quick decisions without sometimes going to the details of it, and not always taking the responsibility of the decisions that she took. As against these two, Mr. Raghuvar Das, I was not in his office, but I was working with him, so to say, in Jharkhand. He reminded me a bit of Kalyan Singh. But whereas Kalyan Singh had the support of probably a very competent set of civil servants, he picked up the very right people to guide him. I was not very sure about Raghuvar Das being assisted by similarly competent civil servants, because I think the best of civil servants Jharkhand came to Delhi. They didn't serve in Jharkhand. They were outstanding officers. I know of Jharkhand, they were brilliant officers, but not many chose to stay back in Jharkhand. They came to Delhi. Unlike that, I think Kalyan Singh had a tremendous set of officers to assist.
So going back to that discussion, the way of work approach, there was a difference when you have served under the Kalyan Singh and the Miss Mayawati. You have mentioned like the detailing part. So did you mean that once we get into the details, it makes us grounded and to understand, and it helps to take a better decision as compared to taking a half a decision and not sure about the results? So, what do you suggest? To going into detail is much more important, or to prioritize the time delivery is important?
Not in all decisions, but there are certain decisions which have large scale implication for the state. And the chief minister is the highest functionary of the state. There are some decisions which have large scale implications, and even such decisions which do not have large scale implications. I think what prompts a decision is very important. What is the intention behind a decision is very important, because it conveys a signal to other civil servants, other ministers, as to how they should approach a decision. So, if uh, there are certain underlying issues in a process of decision making, those issues need to be understood before a decision gets taken. You can't just take it. And secondly, the message that you're conveying, it's very important. I distinctly remember I was a day officer with Mayawati ji, and she called me for a discussion on a file. And when I read the file, I found that the decision should not be taken in favor of the applicant because it was against the rules. So I told her that the secretary himself has written that it's against the rule. I came out and sat out. Later on, another officer went inside, and after a discussion with him, I don't know what he told her. She comes out and tells me, देखिए ये तो कह रहे हैं हो सकता है. So now the point is, if a wrong decision gets taken, then the signal to others would be that you can take wrong decisions. Kalyan Singh was very particular. He ensured that not a single wrong decision was taken because he didn't want to convey a message that at his level any wrong decision will be taken, so as to ensure that no one else, no other minister takes a wrong decision. He was very particular about it.
All right. Yeah. So, as we all know, that both Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh being formed around the same time, and I guess it was Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana that took you to Jharkhand. So, as we see the development in Chhattisgarh much ahead while Jharkhand lagged behind. However, things began to change as you have mentioned in the book, like when Mr. Raghuvar Das has assumed his charge and office as a chief minister in 2014. So, how was your experience working with him during that tenure as a secretary?
No, as I said, I was not coal secretary then. It was after retirement that I joined him. I used to meet him as coal secretary because there's a lot
Okay.
of coal in Jharkhand. And I used to meet him as secretary education also. He was then also the chief minister. And I found him very sharp, very positive. As I said, he reminded me of Kalyan Singh because of his commitment to the state. State was in a bad shape, as you rightly say, as compared to Chhattisgarh. They were formed around the same time. But whereas Chhattisgarh had actually taken off, Jharkhand was in trouble for a variety of reasons, including political ones. The political tenures of chief ministers were short. The bureaucracy also, the best of them were in Delhi. As against that, Chhattisgarh, the political tenures of chief ministers were much longer. And the officers preferred to stay back in Chhattisgarh. Some outstanding officers preferred to stay back. So that was the difference between two states. But Raghuvar Das himself I found him very committed, wanted to do things very sharp, not strongly. I mean, he was not a pig-headed person in the sense that if he had a point of view, he had a point of view. He would give you a thought, and he had an open mind. I distinctly remember discussing it with the role of non-governmental organizations. Initially, he had some wrong impression about all NGOs, and he said NGOs should not come to the state. But when I explained to him that not all NGOs are bad and there are good NGOs all over the country, he not only agreed, we organized a conference of NGOs at Ranchi, and thereafter NGOs started working very actively in the state of Jharkhand. So in that sense, I found Raghubar Das very receptive to ideas, sometimes different from what he had thought of initially.
You became coal secretary after the coal scam and conducted transparent coal auction. So, what strategy did you implement to ensure the process success and transparency? And was it a difficult decision for you to make or to take that charge to become a coal secretary at that point of time? Because that time was that was getting highlighted, like coal scam has happened. So, how was that decision for you to take?
See, I had never any role to play in any task that got given by the government. I never meant any politician for any favor or anything. I was given the charge of coal secretary, I took it. To begin with, yes, it was pretty daunting. As I walked into the room of coal secretary, I thought I was walking into a graveyard because the CBI was after officers, files, everything was haywire. But
Mm-hmm.
being an optimist, I thought things would not become any worse because they were the worst. So any improvement, I could walk away with that credit. But more than that, what we did was use technology to the hilt to ensure transparency in the future coal block auctions. And that's why the auctions that we held and the process that we put in place stand even today. I left it in 2016 and now it's 24, 8 years down the line. We have a similar process going for coal block auction. So first, use of technology. Second, understanding the processes and building in a very transparent process so that everyone could know what's going on. And if through transparency we could demonstrate that everything could be done in a very smooth manner. It did happen in a reasonably smooth manner. But more than that, we looked at the cause of the entire crisis, and to our understanding, it was not coal scam. A coal scam was a result, so-called coal scam was the result of shortage of coal. So we went into the details of the causes of shortage of coal, and the real coal story is not about coal block auction. It is about increase in coal production from acute scarcity to begin with to a position where we are toying with the idea of exporting coal to Bangladesh. So this was the real coal story of increasing coal production to an extent that no one, even I didn't believe the manner in which happened. And the strategy adopted was that go down to the place where the problem was. So In the 2 years as school secretary, I did not convene a single meeting in Delhi. I used to travel down to the states, discuss with the chief minister, chief secretary, local officers to, to work out how coal production will increase. And there were three primary aspects to it. One was land acquisition, because you have to acquire land to excavate coal. Second, to get environmental forest clearance. And third, to build railway lines to evacuate coal from where it was dug. In all these three cases, the role of state government was very important. So I used to go to the states, sit down with them, and convey a value proposition. It is this conveying a value proposition and holding discussions with the states in the states that I think did the trick, and coal production increased.
Yeah. And one more thing I would like to ask, when you have mentioned a strategy and while finding the innovative ideas, do you support finding root cause takes more important rather than going behind the symptom?
No, you have to understand the cause of a problem. Any problem, you have to dig deep. You have to dive deep. Because sometimes scratching the surface may provide you some temporary relief. It's like a band-aid. But unless you go into the cause of a problem, you'll not find a solution. And that was my habit right through my career, to dig deep into the fundamental cause of the problem. Like in case of coal, as I was mentioning, it was not scams, it was shortage of coal. And then why shortage of coal? Shortage of coal because we had 300 billion tons of coals in reserve, and our requirement was less than a billion ton. So there was no shortage of coal per se. The question was whether we are able to acquire land, whether we are able to get the clearances, whether we had to evacuate coal. And for this, you go to the next layer. Why is there a problem in acquisition of land? Can we find a solution? So it is basically our effort to find solutions to the fundamental problem that led to the solution to the problems.
Yeah, as you have rightly mentioned, all the component we have to integrate at one place, and then we can analyze the root cause problem, and then we can come out with that analysis, like what could be the innovative solution for any problem which we have right now in our plate. So, coming to the next thing which you have taken, that was educational reform. So, as an education secretary of India, what were the key reforms you initiated, and what impact did they have on the education system?
See, education was much more complex than coal. I have written in my book and used this phrase that when I was transferred from coal to education, I thought I was going out of the dark dungeons of coal mines to bright lights of school education. And to my utmost horror, I found that the mafias of school education were much worse than mafias of coal. Because in coal, mining was underground, mafias were overground. In education, all the mafias are underground. And I have written a full chapter on the mafias in school education. And one of my tasks, among many tasks, was to somehow tackle these mafias. I succeeded in some, I failed in some, because education was probably the only job that I had my entire career of 38 years where I felt that I should have had more time. In all other assignments, I made myself redundant. Even as school secretary, I used to tell the PMO, there's nothing left for me to be done. You please move me out. But in education, I had about 20 months, and I wish I had more time because the problems here are much more complex. And the pivot and the key to education is teachers. To me, teachers light at the pivot of its school education, and that's where it's totally messed up. Messed up in terms of training such budding teachers who ultimately become teachers. I've written about the mafia of the B.Ed and D.El.Ed colleges, how we tried to tackle them, but we failed. A very senior officer had to resign on account of paucity of time. I can't go into the details of it. It's all there in my book. But that was the key, because if you don't train the teachers properly who are going to become teachers, what in the hell they will teach? Similarly, the recruitment process was wonky. You had a former chief minister behind the bars for the scam in teachers, the recruitment in Haryana. So you had that problem of first not training them properly. Second, the selection process was wonky. Then there was no organized way of training the teachers when they're there. The whole system is changing every day. So you have to equip them. Now, as far as the training part of was concerned, I think we managed to sort it out. We set up a Diksha portal where we worked out the details of how training will happen, how teachers will be selected for that. As far as the selection of teachers to government jobs are concerned, I am glad that the central government, after the national education policy, they have come up with a framework which will prevent these scams from happening. As far as the B.Ed and D.El.Ed college is concerned, in that too, I believe the national education policy takes a very good step of doing away with 2-year training course, they will now have a 4-year bearded training course, meaning thereby all the fraudulent colleges will have to seek recognition again.
Yes, this is a very innovative approach, when we see into the national education policies 2020, which has been developed. So, can you share a specific project or policies of your time, while when you were working under Mr. Kalyan Singh or maybe Ms. Mayawati, when you have felt that kind of, the pressure or maybe stuck? Because the reason I'm asking the stuckness, being around with people or maybe while serving across the industry, so how to resolve that kind of stuck, and if you have faced any, how did you resolve it?
See, when I was with Kalyan Singh and Mayawati, I was not a very senior officer. I would have put in about 10, 11, even years. At that level, you're not part of a policy formulation. It's a much senior level that you do. So with Mayawati or with Kalyan Singh, I don't recall having provided inputs to a policy that impacted the state. There were more of incident based individual cases that I was more concerned with rather than actual policy formulation. I did witness a couple of things. I was not directly involved in it. To witness Mr. Kalyan Singh, how he evolved the policy of transfer of doctors, because that was a scandal in the state. Doctors, there was a lot of money that used to change hands. So he formulated a formula for transfer of doctors and stuck to it. So that's what he did. And a secretary who did not follow that formula was shown the door. So that's what, again, another incident where Kalyan Singh would not brook any nonsense in the principles that he established. So he established this principle, that system. Anyone not following that would pay a price. So this is what I saw of him. As against that, Mayawati was much more ad hoc. She decided what she wanted to do. I think she did not believe in as much systems as her own persona, own individual decision making. Kalyan Singh was more a systems man.
Uh, Thank you. And moving forward, let's discuss your experience with our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. And could you please elaborate on why all secretary level officers were asked to visit the place of their first posting?
Mr. Modi started very brilliantly. He came up with new ideas, and one such idea was that the officers should visit the first place of posting. And the reason was for them to understand when they were posted how much has happened, what has not happened, why it has not happened, how can it be made to happen. And I visited my first place of posting. I went over to Devariya district. I was posted as a joint magistrate, Kushinagar, and I learned a lot during that visit. I was at that point in time coal secretary. There was no coal in that district, but apart from that, I got to know how the division or subdivision where I've posted, how much progress. Actually, it had become a district. When I was posted there, it was a subdivision. Later on, it was treated as a new district. And I saw the development that had taken place in that place. And I was very pleasantly surprised. I remember driving down from car on arrival at Gorakhpur. I drove down to Kushin. And on the way, in the morning, I saw number of girls riding bicycles going to the school. That was an amazing scene, which I could not visualize when I was posted there maybe 30 years earlier. And it was pleasant for me to see so many girls going on bicycle to the schools. I mean, there were many other things. The roads had improved, buildings had improved. So much development had taken place. Obviously, there was more to be done there, but development was clearly visible. I think the idea was to go back to the roots, look at the field, and that was a brilliant idea on the part of the Prime Minister.
Yeah, and also I guess the reason behind sending all the officers to their first posting would be identify the gaps which can be
Yes.
sorted out in 21st century, considering the more innovative ideas to guide more young
Yes.
officers.
Yes.
Looking back on your 38 years career, what advice would you give to that young civil servant and who wish to make a difference in India?
I have written in my book, my first book, that if I were to be born again, I'd like to be an IAS officer all over. For the simple reason, the amount of satisfaction that you can derive out of doing what you can as an IAS officer is absolutely amazing. So, despite whatever people may say, I think an IAS officer still has a very, very important role to play. You can contribute phenomenally to development. You may not change the world, but you can change a lot of things if you change yourself. Potential is there for doing a lot. Then it depends on the officer whether he wants to take this opportunity or doing what he can. I think he should.
And what motivated you to write this phenomenal book, Encounters with Politicians?
So this is my fourth book. I had no intention of writing so many books. When I was in service, I was a very avid reader. I used to read about 100 books a year. So I thought I must have a book in my name. So I started writing my first book, Not Just a Civil Servant. And this took me about 8 years. It was published after I retired. But I enjoyed writing that book, though it took me 8 years. And then came the second book, The Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. Third one then came No More a Civil Servant. And since I enjoy writing, the fourth one also came. And this came as a consequence of my flipping over my diary. I used to write a diary, a page every day when I was in service. And I found some very interesting incidents in that diary. So I thought might as well put it as in form of a book, and came Encounters.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing this insight. So, before I end, I would like to mention that this book called Encounters with Politician will be an integrating read for everyone interested in knowing the fascinating stories and efforts involved when politicians and bureaucrats make the policies that shape our lives. Please do check out the link mentioned in the description to buy and read this book, which features many glimpses of how India is actually governed. Thank you.
Thank you, Shilpi. Bye. God bless you.
Thank you, sir.